You don't need any science to figure this out. You just need to have the wherewithal to experiment and try it for yourself, because that is all you'll need to see that this isn't some sort of like weird fad diet. This is something that we've done since day one, and the body has been developed with it. It's been built from that, and so regardless of our ethical position, the evolutionary side of stuff dictates that your body now is dependent on this food.
Adam, how did you find carnivore?
So I actually found carnivore through 10 years of veganism, um, five of which were subsequently spent kind of chronically ill, unfortunately. Um, so it's been an interesting journey for me. But you know, growing up, I was omnivore, and you pretty much just, you know how it is, you just eat what you want. Um, pizzas, junk food, whatever. You seem to be immune to anything of this. Go out drinking, binge drinking, whatever, and you sleep like a baby. You wake up and you just do it all over again, and there's absolutely, seemingly no problem. And later down the line, you perhaps realise there was, but in that moment, you're okay. And working though, you sort of like, I suppose I was always had some mental kind of like illness to some extent, like general sort of anxiety, depression, like stress, and I think most people can relate to those things. And so, you know, in that regard, I was always quite a deep thinker, like thinking outside of the box, like what is going on here? Why am I just, you know, in this box going to another box, like at work, at home, and just my movements were just, backwards and forwards, and it just didn't make any sense to me. I felt kind of like slave. So this kind of like level of deep thinking led me to one of the most, well, easily the most amazing experience of my life, which is what we would term as spiritual awakening. I don't really like the labels of or the word spiritual, because people tend to have knee-jerk reactions to it, but an absolutely phenomenal experience in which you sort of awaken from the dream of physical reality. And that is in essence what it is. Um, an expansion of awareness. And I won't, that's a whole story for another day, but in that process came this sort of almost this expansion of compassion as well. And overnight, I went vegan. I started watching all of these documentaries. Physiologically, it was a huge shift for me as well. Like I've never been overweight. I was quite sort of healthy in that regard, but I lost a lot of weight very quickly. And I'd stopped drinking, stopped taking the recreational drugs. I was never that big into that, but it was just something that was there. And people would say, "Oh," like, it became quite offensive at one point where they were saying, like, "Oh, Adam, like we're worried about you. You've lost so much weight, and we used to think that you looked all right." It's like, "Oh, you used to be attractive, Adam." Like, and so you don't realize that when things happen, like so quickly, because you sort of see yourself in the mirror every day. But clearly, like, something had changed very drastically, and I think there's a deeper level to that, like perhaps neurologically, and from what I'd experienced through this kind of awakening. Um, and so, like, yeah, watching documentaries though about well, Earthlings was one of them, Forks Over Knives, and then later down the line, a documentary called The Game Changers. Um, and I sort of still do identify, like I mentioned, I don't really like labels, so I do identify ethically, with some of the vegan principles. Because the industrialization of everything, the way that things are being done, could easily be reformed and changed. So a lot of these conditions are very barbaric, and I still relate to all that. But watching those things kind of invariably led me to eating the rainbow, like smoothies, juices, like everything. I don't know if you're familiar with Italian photography, but it's something that I think people get involved or get interested in. It's like contact prints of an object's electrical um, discharge, if you like, um, and they often put like an image of an apple next to a steak. And so the apple will be radiating all this glorious, like the chi, prana, all these words start coming to mind. Whereas the steak has just nothing, right? So it depicts it as being this sort of dead matter that you just don't really want to consider eating. And so you start thinking in terms of energy and vibration. You just want to eat all of this. You sort of feel like that is your immune system. And then for 5 years, though, I was perfectly fine. So that was sort of like a compounding effect that sold me into this vegan movement. So it was the ethical side of it, and it was also that was kind of like the primary reason for me going vegan, was that really like and caring for the animals, and just realizing like, hey, we don't treat our pets like this. Why are we treating animals outside of our immediate spheres in such a hideous way? But then, yeah, because of the fact that I wasn't getting ill, and previously when I was omnivore growing up in my sort of teens and 20s, invariably you come into the colds, the coughs, you're just sort of getting sick every now and then, maybe once or twice a year, you'll feel like death for like a week. And because that had all gone away, I was like, well, absolutely, like this is me for life, like I'm going to be continuing to eat like this forever. But then, simultaneously, I was never, again, it was the sort of depression and the anxiety, if you like, which led me to experimenting with ayahuasca, which you might be familiar with, which is like, they call it a plant medicine. It certainly didn't operate as medicine for me, but it was an absolutely incredible experience, and, equally horrifying experience in many ways. Um, but this led, like, whilst I was actually in the ceremony, I had this full on panic attack, which was probably, like I just mentioned, one of the amazing experiences of my life, being the awakening. But this was definitely one of the most hideous experiences of my life. And I'd never thought that I would be one to experience like a panic attack. And I didn't realize how horrendous they are. I mean, you literally feel like this is it, it's game over. Um, and you're just sort of like absolutely sweltering and then freezing cold. Like your sort of neurological system doesn't quite know how to handle the experience that you're having. Um, and so I went home, and then slowly I started experiencing these sort of like daggering sensations in my stomach. Um, and so I was just solely putting it down to this sort of experience that I'd had. And they sort of subtly started increasing. And then that took me through into, 2020, the, turning point for a lot of people. But for me, um, specifically, like, well, it was very much the point that I became like just very noticeably ill. Um, Having had 5 years of like almost like paradise, in which I was just, eating very well, eating like a king. I was thinking like, I've got it right, and everyone's, they need, similar to how I now feel sort of about the carnivore diet, hilariously. And it's yeah, just eating those things, I think, led to these sensations, which later I realized was a condition called SIBO. Um, but like, as I mentioned to you just briefly earlier, like, I've not been one for, I haven't had much faith in the sort of medical industry, and I'd rather try and resolve things on my own. And like, it made sense. All the symptoms were there. I mean, SIBO, for anyone who doesn't know, is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Um, and simply they are there, and they are overgrowing because of the abundance of sugars that are there to be fermented. So the first thing that I tried out was a low FODMAP diet. So they're like fermentable oligomonosaccharides, I think, and polyols. So this is a very restrictive diet. It pretty much writes off like essentially 95% of fruits and vegetables. Even the ones that are, okay, are just, in moderation. So you suddenly got to become a detective, and it's just not really a lifestyle that you don't want to have to think so scientifically about just enjoying food. Um, so I was following that, and it helped absolutely. But it wasn't the cure. It wasn't like something that I could do long term, because it was, quite frankly, so restrictive. Um, and so, like, after a few sort of like months of that, perhaps even a year or two goes by, um, and you kind of just want to try different things out, because it's like, well, obviously I'm not getting to the meat of this. Like, this isn't actually happening. Like, I'm just avoiding things, and when I experiment with the stuff that I was eating, all the symptoms come back again. And so then I tried doing what's called an elemental diet, where it's just like a meal replacement. But again, that's quite expensive. It only lasts for about, depending on how much of it you buy, it's like a month or 2 months, maybe 3 months supply, I think I had. And so you think, oh, brilliant, whilst you're doing it, like, this is great. And then when you go back to the diet that I was having, um, all the symptoms are still there. So there's clearly nothing that's actually changed in terms of the sort of microbiome. Um, and then, you try other more extreme thing. I tried a 7 day when I was in Portugal, just floating around like a nomad. I was like, I've got to come to the end of my tether with this. It's like, not only am I experiencing these daggering stomach pains, typically it would be like in the evening or late afternoon. So it's sort of like the accumulation from breakfast to lunch to dinner. The dinner was sort of the tipping point, and then it would absolutely ruin my sleep. I think this was probably the worst symptom that I've had, and it was probably, like I mentioned, it was in part due to the vegan diet, I think, but also some of the sort of like neurological implications of this awakening experience I'd had. I felt like I'd become more sensitive to certain things, like fight or flight was activated very easily, still is actually something I'm still recovering from. But every night I'd wake up about between 4 and 4:30 a.m. Um, and have it was like I'd been. I mean, they were like night terrors. So you'd wake up like soaking wet, and like they're so lucid as well. For anyone who's familiar with lucid dreaming, um, you'd have these experiences not being lucid, and then suddenly it'd be a blissful moment where you realize that you're dreaming, and it's kind of like it transforms very quickly. But that would often happen after I've woken from the nightmares, and then it would be quite blissful after that. But that experience was, because, as you probably know, and anyone knows, like if you don't get your sleep, it's life's not worth living. It's just, if your sleep is bad, your life is bad. And so my sleep has been bad for a long, long time. It is improving now, but it's something that, yeah, is has definitely been a part of my journey and trying to heal. And and all along, though, and keto was another thing, that I've tried. Um, it was sort of like I was so wrapped up with the veganism that I wanted to coin a new diet, which was like the veto diet, right? Where it's like it's still vegan, but it's keto. So I'm like, how restrictive? I was convinced I was going to try and make this work. So, needless to say, it didn't.
And just out of interest, what kind of foods go into a veto diet?
I mean, at the end of the day, I was like writing things down. I was like, this is quite a short list. It's like avocados, coconut based things. So it was trying to get these sort of like less sort of toxic uh, fruits and plants involved, Um, but it's like kale, spinach, things just for the vitamins, and I try to get the fat principally through avocado. I pretty much just turn it into an avocado. Um, so and I still I haven't had an avocado for a long time now because I've been strictly carnivore, as we'll come on to, but it's yeah, I think it is to do with getting the balance right, and that balance certainly isn't 50-50 when it comes to sugars and fats, but it's mixing the keto diet though with the sugars was a massive mistake, really, because you think you're going to get better. You learn about all of these various herbs and like oil of oregano and how these things are really soothing and helpful. But they just frankly made it infinitely worse. It was just like I couldn't even get to sleep. Like I'd be lucky to actually get to sleep. So I started struggling with insomnia. Um, and like the sheer agony of that's what's going on. It's just like a chaos going on in my stomach, just like noises, like the bloating, the pain. It's like things that should be happening in the large intestine are ultimately happening in the small intestine, which is way too far up. So you're getting all the pain from these microbes fermenting your food, and it just doesn't. It's not conducive for good sleep, frankly. Um, so that is like some of the some of the sort of things that I've tried, and like I mentioned earlier to you, meat was never an option for me. It was just simply because of my ideology. It was, I'd actually at the time I would have vomited if someone had given me meat or any sort of dairy product. Because of all of there is propaganda involved in it, but there is also, like I mentioned, a reality in terms of some of the industrialization of these this food network that we have. But the documentary, some of the things that you see in those documentaries, they really get to the core of your mind, and they're difficult to shake, especially when you realize that you're ill and you want to heal. But it's like it just the actual solution I was looking for simply wasn't an option. Um, and like in a nutshell, I mean that almost sort of leads me up to where I am now, in terms of, well, the carnivore experience began about two months ago. So I think I'm about 60 days in, and I'd ignored, um, my girlfriend at the time, about 5 years ago, was showing me videos from Ken Berry, and I was just basically discarding it from knee jerk reaction, though understandably from my background. And so like, but then, enough was enough about 2 months ago, and I was just like, I had to learn to soften my position. I realised that, hey, humane slaughter is possible, quite clearly. But in my mind, I was thinking it's an oxymoron. It's like I wouldn't just take the life of someone if it's needless, because at the time I felt like all of what's happening, these slaughterhouses, was needless. But now that I realise that it isn't, because we fundamentally require these essential fatty acids and amino acids and all the rest of it. I yeah, had discarded that at the time, but 2 months ago, I started it. I've been very strict with it, and immediately, not dissimilar, I have to say, to some of the other non sort of like, they don't have longevity, like I was mentioning with the elemental diet, and the fasting. I mean, there's only so long you can fast, right? I mean, I'm nearly killing myself from a 7 day water fast was like one of the sort of like eye-opening moments. But I think with the carnivore diet has the longevity, has that, the fact that this can be a lifestyle, it can be something that can come with you throughout life, and that therefore that is clearly the cure. And as so many people around the world are beginning to realize, we've been conditioned in such a way that, of course, we want to turn away from the ideas. And I know nobody wants coronary heart disease, so they think, well, that's strictly associated with eating red meat in particular, so I'm going to stop that straight away, not realizing that it's almost like an inversion of what needs to happen. But yeah, so since then it's been all good. Like no more stomach issues, which for me was just such a, you feel like you're imprisoned in your own body. Like you feel like you can't live a day with just doing freely what you want to do. It's just like you've got to think about, how close I am to the bathroom, um, how am I going to um, do anything like go to a restaurant or anything, and just live like a normal life, if you like. And so, yeah, doing that has definitely led me to balance out my position ultimately, and not get polarized. I think that's what I think happens to a lot of people. Like we're very much, we like to sort of like forge an allegiance to something, and we have this like very much polarized society in many ways, like politically and racially and religiously, spiritually, like, even sports, and now even food. It's like, are we really going to be now getting divided on food as well? you know
Yeah, it's like it's this human nature thing. We've got to pick a team for everything. It's kind of weird, right?
yeah, that's, I think, what's happening, and I think like the powers that be know it fine well, and you see how it all plays out. But yeah, and that's why it's like in my mind now, as I've shifted to carnivore, I can see that happen, and I can see how when someone has been almost radicalized because they've seen how unhealthy they were, and now how healthy they are, we now have this label called carnivore, and it's sort of like, well, evolutionary, like back in the day, I think it's natural to sort of understand that I think we are ultimately keto. There is a sort of Venn diagram between which nature's cycles lead us to inevitably like eating fruit, I think, in summertime, and fattening ourselves up to as a survival mechanism. And the fact that our bodies know what to do with sugar is, for me, sort of like the clue and the evidence that sugar has, and it has been involved, is just not essential. It's sort of useful to the body. The body knows what to do with it. It knows how to store it, and of course, the brain requires it to a certain extent. But today, we've gone nuts. Like it's,
It just never used to come in boxes with nutrition labels.
yeah. I mean, like you go to the supermarket now, and it's just like sort of being in a drugs depot. Like, you go past the first and second aisle, and it's like just bags of cocaine, but it's just bags of sugar, right? It's just sugar, sugar, like in a variety of different colors and all the cereals, and like, you can see how they sell the kids on all of these sweets, and it's just simply the colors that are so, it's almost like they're emulating nature with the fruits and stuff, but it's like the packaging and the marketing behind it is sort of evil genius in a way. And yeah, so I've never haven't bought anything from those sort of central aisles for a long while, but yeah, so now it's like I've shifted from aisle one to aisle two, which is typically where it's like aisle one is all the fruits and veg, and aisle two is like the meats. So it's kind of still amazing actually. And life always throws curveballs at you, and it's like you never quite know what it's got in store for you. And I would never, even just a few months ago, I would never, like, the idea that I'm talking to you now about carnivore diet and speaking sort of like almost uh, uh, preacher like, how I've been talking to someone. Oh my God, you got to do. I can't believe it. It's like another awakening from the Matrix, and just like this is ridiculous. Like, we're poisoning ourselves. Like, it all makes sense. All of the illnesses that people are scratching their heads, like cancer research, and it's like, oh, what can it be? Oh, we still haven't figured it out. It's like, well, have you figured out? Have you sort of like thought about what we're eating? Or perhaps that's wrong.
Yeah, and yeah, it just comes down to that. Maybe let's start at the foundational level rather than going, thinking it's
Yeah, like
something
what?
that's happening a few steps down the way, you know?
Yeah, it's like,
Mm.
the building blocks of our bodies are, like I say, there's essential amino acids, essential fatty acids, but there are no essential carbohydrates. And so this is something that, like I mentioned, is useful but not fundamentally required. Especially not, like I say, to the degree to which we're eating them. And it's just everywhere, isn't it? It's such a subtle thing that's happening, like under, like behind the scenes, if you like. And it's so normalized, and it's just it's so hard to awaken from, even though it's so, once you see it, it's like, oh my God, it's so obvious. Like, we're just poisoning ourselves, and it's like, it's a similar thing. I feel like it's like we have with the warnings on packets of cigarettes. There should be, in the future, there'll perhaps be something like that on the boxes of cereals. Like, sugar can cause, because of course the dose is the poison, right? It's like, it's not that it is a toxin. It's like, well, water can be a toxin, air can be a toxin. If you have too much, you'll hyperventilate, you'll die. You have water, that's not going to, too much water, that's not going to be good news. So if you, like, everything has its sort of like threshold at which point it becomes a toxin. And I feel like the extent to which we're consuming sugar is clearly just back way down, way too far. And so, yeah, there's some sort of warning. I feel like in the future, perhaps will be there when we accept what we're doing. We make that correlation, which is a strict cause and effect. Like, anyone can tell you, it's an obvious cause and effect relationship. As people like Dr. Shafe are saying, it's like you don't need any science to figure this out. You just need to have the wherewithal to experiment and try it for yourself, because that is all you'll need to see that this isn't some sort of like weird fad diet. This is something that we've done since day one, and the body has been developed with it. It's been built from that, and so regardless of our ethical position, the evolutionary side of stuff dictates that your body now is dependent on this food. Um, and it's like, it's almost an impossible thing to get away from, even though, like I say, we do need some degree of reform in the industrialization and the way that we're treating animals and various things. So if we can, like, sort of hold hands, sing kumbaya, vegans and carnivores, I think we'll be on to a winner. But it's like, it's the balancing point for everyone. Bio individuality is key, and like people figuring out what they're more sensitive to than others, so on and so forth.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I agree. I don't know how soon that kumbaya moment's gonna come, but yeah. Um, yeah. So regarding your particular situation, like those stomach issues have just gone.
Yeah, the stomach issues have gone, and more amazingly, I mean, it's probably TMI, but anal fissures. Let's talk about anal fissures. It's like things that I'm experiencing in my 30s that I think you'd only experience in your 90s. And I'm like just scratching my head, just thinking, why on earth is this happening? You know, things that would just never go away. And subtle things like inflammation, like bits of arthritis in your, say, fingers. And the most amazing thing so far for me, being a runner, no lactic acid the next day in my muscles. That is the ultimate. Um, that for me, I'm just like I say, it is just escaping the matrix, just realizing like this is so obvious. Like, because why should we have this? It's almost like you go for a run and then the next day you're going to have a hangover from the run or any sort of exercise, right? It's like, why should it be like that? Like, you know, you look at these leopards and these lions, like, are they the next day just like, oh, no, sorry, I've got a bit like, can't chase any zebra today. Like, I've got a little bit too much aches going on. Like, they're just so athletic and amazing and fit. And it's like, clearly there's no vegetables in their diet is one example, but you can realize like, once your muscles strip out all of that glycogen, um, and which was just simply there as I feel like a backup option. Like if you're in a condition of scarcity, your body will hold and convert sugar through lipogenesis into fat, and it's a survival mechanism. But it's like, well, no, if you're in a situation of abundance, your body doesn't need to do that now. It can have its preferred fuel source, and you're good to go. And like it's a preferred fuel source because you feel infinitely better than you do when you're eating all these carbs and the brain fog, all that lifts, stomach issues go away, everything just clears up. And it's yeah, I suppose it's a food that allows you to be more moderate in your approach to how much of these carbohydrates that you would have that would historically only be available at certain times of the year, but now it's just 24/7 in your face. You go to the supermarket, what do you want? You've got this incredible option in front of you, and it's hard to know, like what, especially when you've got people getting psyoped about meat and all of this stuff that we shouldn't be eating. And as they do, they just tend to invert everything. And we've been led down the garden path in that regard.
So, how about things like anxiety and stuff? Is that cleared up?
Yeah. So one of my parts of my journey was trying to figure out, almost like chicken egg, what's happened. Like, why am I like I'd never experienced panic attacks before. I think some of the experience that I'd have, like spiritually, were involved, but I never knew like, is the anxiety creating the stomach upset, or is the upset in my stomach creating the anxiety? And I think it works both ways. Like, so the more you're in fight or flight, the more your body will relegate these sort of digestive faculties, because of course all of the attention gets thrown into your extremities. Like the blood will circulate more so in your limbs to escape, and so like I think it's like your sympathetic nervous system just gets overridden, or your parasympathetic gets overridden. You're basically just living your life in fight or flight. And whilst that's happening and the focus is shifted away from the stomach, like the microbes and everything that would otherwise be taken care of is just kind of getting worse, by the day. And yeah, it's something though that I'm still trying to deal with. Like the sleep has improved, but I don't know whether that, to what extent that is based on the veganism, and what extent it's just simply based on my psychological constitution and like my the way that I think, like quite sort of like intense thoughts. I find it quite difficult to switch my brain off. Um, but I have noticed though, like now doing OMAD, and having nothing to consider when you're lying in bed, you don't want anything to be processing really in your stomach. It's like you put that out of the equation and you're sated. Um, I found that your body naturally like can perhaps produce more melatonin, and that's sort of been the problem. I can't produce melatonin. Like I'm never tired. Like when I go to bed, I feel like I'm forcing myself just because it's that time of day. I'm just forcing myself. I'm just going to bed hoping that I fall asleep. Um, and so yeah, it's an ongoing work in progress, really.
Yeah. Don't worry. When you get to my age, that'll all be over. You'll be
But you find
you'll
finding it easy to sleep, or
yeah. Yeah, it's because I get up so early, but yeah, I get
Right.
up early in the morning and just like nod off. I'll be sitting in front of the computer at night, and it'd be 9 p.m. or something. I'll just be like, "Mm,
Oh, wow. Well, I look forward to
yeah."
those days.
That, it's like mild narcolepsy almost, you know?
Oh God, that sounds like heaven to me. Like I would absolutely love it. The only time I'm able to get the sleep is like once I've been sort of awoken at say 4 a.m. After that horrific experience, um, I'd have to just sit up on my bed for maybe half an hour. I might sort of walk around the house, but when I come back, I can feel suddenly there's a flood of melatonin, and it just it's such an amazing feeling because it's become sort of like a scarce resource for me, melatonin, um, and it's otherwise I need that. It might only be for an hour or two, but it's okay to get me through the day. And then like I need to probably be a little bit more, with my biomarkers and everything in terms of like waking up at exactly the same time. And but yeah, it's yeah that one is a difficult uh, thing to crack because it's something that I think builds up over a long time, and therefore I can't expect a miraculous recovery. It's something that I think if you start messing with the endocrine system, and that was one of the things I was going to mention in terms of the vegan diet, like being deficient in B12, which I think is actually something that's synthesized in the soil as such. Um, so if we perhaps lived in a less sanitized society where everything is cleaned and sprayed and all GMO and all the rest of it, we'd probably still actually get B12 from a vegan diet. But of course, we're not living in that way, and therefore we're mostly deficient. But now I wonder to what extent that diet and following that lifestyle has led to my endocrine system being sort of like, well, the technical term being out of whack, right? It's just out of sync, and it struggles to know how to regulate things. And so it's just like, yeah, never tired and, just wired. It's like living life in this stressful society I think there's a certain extent. It was a Krishnamurti who said, it's no measure of good health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society or something like this. Um, and it's, like you're meant to be mentally ill in this society because it's insane. Like what we're experiencing is mad. It's not meant to be this way. It was never this way in the past. The way that we're sort of almost rent slaves and walking around, and that is essentially what I'm trying to do with. I'm trying to run a New Earth movement. New Earth.land is the website. It's about trying to liberate people from rent slavery and trying to reform housing because there's no reason we need to be paying this much. Of course, if you give that money back to people, we'll be able to spend it on nourishing ourselves more appropriately. That was one of the things that I actually wanted to mention was the cost of things. And being like, the ribeyes and things are out of my price bracket, unfortunately. Here in the UK, if you want a ribeye, you get like, I think it's about 230 grams of a gram ribeye. You're talking about £8, like £7 something, and I'd need about 4 or 5 of those. If I were to sort of eat. Thank God for like minced beef, where that's pretty much the only way that I'm going about this at the moment. Um, is using minced beef to kind of like compact and make like burgers or meatballs, and might have some cheese with it and like salt it or whatever. If it went for the minced beef, I'd find it a hard time to figure out how I can actually um, afford it, because it was like before. I suppose it's probably not much different to what I was paying before, but only if I was to say eat a rump steak or something like that, I wouldn't be able to have like the creme de la creme of like the ribeyes and so like, but that's something that would hopefully change. I can't know whether I'm eating the best mincemeat, but then I go for the highest fat 25%, because it's cheaper, and also now I realise like actually this is probably what I want. I don't want the lean 5% mincemeat, like so yeah, it's and I've got my ketone meter here, which I've been sort of like using, and I've realised through buying that my body has a really hard time getting into ketosis. I have to intermittent fast to get there, but eating anything knocks me out of it because I'm just like baby carnivore really at this point. Um, so even eating like minced beef, 25% fat, that will throw me out of ketosis. Um, and like I've noticed, if the more that I do OMAD though, it's getting a little bit better. And I think it will take a while for me to become fat adapted because I've been vegan for so long. My body's been so used to
Mm.
burning all the protein or just converting the proteins into sugars. Um, so that might take a while, but
I wonder if the sleep also affects that, like, maybe your cortisol's higher, which means that keeps you out of it as well a little bit.
yeah, I wouldn't be surprised at all. It's yeah, that for me is the fundamental thing that I'm trying, hoping to heal and cure, and carnivore is definitely helping in the sense that it's like taking out a lot of the digestive issues, and I think it's just going to take a longer time to heal the endocrine system, and you know what's going on there with my um, the cortisol and the adrenal glands. It's become so sensitive, like it's almost like you know when you're trying to go to sleep and you hear perhaps like a dog comes into the garden, starts barking, and it's like, oh, God. You know, like. But in the past, it would be something that would be in the background. It would be a little bit annoying, but I'd have the ability to just say whatever and still kind of like gets. But now it's like so I can feel like this sensation coming from that area, from the adrenals, and just flooding. You know, it's there like an alarm. You know, and that goes for most other things as well, like things that are just like irritants in the environment. I've become very sensitive to, and it never was quite like that before. Um,
Mm.
so
It's kinda like, everything has now become your next door neighbor playing AC/DC at 2 AM in the morning or something. It's
yeah, it's and it's kind of got to the extreme where, and I don't think this is strictly vegan related, but like although I don't know to what extent the diet has impacted my brain into becoming this way inclined, but I've almost had to ban myself from listening to music because because I find it so difficult to get songs out of my head, and like they just keep circulating. Like and I just can't. It's like, okay, Adam, stop singing that song now. Like stop singing. Like you don't need to keep like if it's like a really like good beat or something or whatever. Like and so that is one I think one of the things that kind of like yeah, it was a sure sign. Okay, something's catastrophically wrong in my body. Like if I'm having to ban myself from listening to music or do anything in the evening, seemingly like I can't do anything in the evening because I know that I won't. I used to go running in the evening, play squash in the evening, play football in the evening, go out for some beers in the evening. But now it's like if I do anything that isn't just lying down and sitting there like a monk from about 7 p.m., I know that I've written it off. If I have too many conversations in the evening, no sleep, like or bad sleep, you know. And it's like I don't really know what quite to do about that, other than to just hope that time can heal me now that I'm on this carnivore diet and trying to figure things out that way.
yeah, really hope that improves for you. Um,
Yeah.
so how you said you're doing OMAD, so how is that, day to day? Is that like breakfast? You're having just mince, or is there anything else in there?
So I'll try and squeeze it into a 4 hour window. Um, and yeah, I might typically have like like streaky bacon, with like scrambled eggs or something like that. That might be it would either be a starter and then I'd have the mincemeat as the main, or I'd have that say like at 12 and it would just be a sort of meal brunch if you like, and then I'd have like the minced beef at like 4, and I'd have like cheese, um, and I suppose I have been having things. I've been struggling to get into ketosis, like I mentioned, and there's certain things that I probably should like. I mean, I've had Greek yogurt. I mean, it's got zero, or it's got about 5 grams, I think, of carbs per quart of tub or whatever. So that I'm still getting. That's quite a hard thing for me to not have Greek yogurt because it's so yummy. But there's certain things that I need to probably be even more for the time being if I want to sort of see improvements in terms of the being in ketosis, because I can directly see the health benefits involved, then yeah, I think yogurt probably needs to go for the time being, and perhaps just like reduce some of the cheese. And I don't mind just having, like the minced beef is scarcely even cooked. It's like, that's because that's another big thing. Oh, you can't have it uncooked. You can't have it like steak tartare, for example. Like these dishes that we've had that have become sort of unpopular. But like the idea of eating of raw meat, people will think that, well, that'll just instantly kill you. Like, and it's like, but I think it's probably beneficial to the gut to some extent to have that the softening. Like sometimes I prefer to have the bacon not too crispy, because you just feel like the body's absorbing it more easily. But generally that is, yeah, I try and eat between 12 and 4 p.m. um, and then I'm good to go. I don't get hungry later on, whereas I used to just be constantly on the sugar roller coaster, eating and then being hungry about 5 minutes later. Um, Now it's like, okay, if I just can squeeze enough into that short window, I just get the benefits not only of being in ketosis, but also the benefits of not having to like process all this food late at night. And I can, like I said, the sleep has improved, but it can definitely, there's still a long way to go with that. But generally, that's how I'm eating at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah, nice. So we talked a little bit earlier on about how, people are kind of, whether it's food or politics or whatever it is, people kind of pick a side or pick a team. Um, when you in the last 2 months, has there been any impact to relationships with the change you've made? Because you're kind of going, well, I'm done with this team. I'm going on to this team for a while, and
Yeah, it's a good question because, yeah, being ostracized from society is something that I'm now very much used to. And so, like, especially since the whole awakening experience, like, people thought I was mentally ill, and because they simply don't understand it. And one of my quests is to try and scientifically explain these incredible, like, seemingly supernatural experiences. So, growing up, I was very much just, in society, as a part of it, socializing the rest of it. But then at the time, going vegan was quite sort of like, my parents would be like, no, you can't do that. It's like, it's crazy. And like, and it kind of, I think that's where a lot of this, sort of like, stress has come from for me. Is not being a part now of society, ultimately being a transgressive thinker or whatever. Um, and so, like, having gone through that and then having gone through 2020, which was traumatizing in a totally different way for me because I can see things in a totally different way. Um, and, you know, and then not only all of that, but then I think finally my parents and friends would get used to me being vegan. And it's like, oh, finally, like, whatever. It's like, no, I'm carnivore now. It's like, okay, that's even weirder, right? Like, no, oh, Adam, no, that's, you're going to kill yourself again. It's like, oh God, I'm so you sort of fed up of being on the fringe of society. But it seems to be something that I've had to experience, and I think hopefully to balance things out a little bit. Like, I mean, I'm Libran. I don't know if you're interested in astrology, but like, seemingly it seems to be one of the core themes of my life is that often the wisdom lies in balance. Um, and it's like it's so easy to see things in black and white, but the truth is often a shade of grey. And it seems to be the case in almost every field. And that's the thing, I think, like you say, it's the allegiance. We want to sort of identify to certain groups. People have referred to the cult, the carnivore, as being like a cult like mentality, and it kind of like makes sense because when someone has experienced such obvious transformations, there's no surprise that you're gonna be sort of quite preacher like, in that regard, because it's like you just want people to be healthy. And like, I suppose because when I became vegan, I was similarly promoting that diet, not just the ethical side of stuff, because I realized later that I'd thrown the baby out with the bathwater. That you're growing up with this diet, but you're also mixing toxins into that. So alcohol for me was something that you binge drink, right? But when I went vegan, I stopped all the meat and all of these sort of like what you'd consider these low vibratory foods, like I mentioned with the Kellyan photography stuff. You'd also at the same time remove the predominant toxin. But then in your mind, you think, well, no, that's nothing. It's just a diet change. And so you start associating the rainbow foods and the smoothies with everything, not realizing it only later. Because I never got a cold. That's one thing. I never got a cold or anything on the vegan diet, but it was like a slow burner. It was something that was creeping up on me. And I think people don't realize on the vegan diet, like how many years have they done it for? And so I'm sort of almost like testament to this, the possibility that it's just not a long-term solution. There's way too many complex sugars involved. The body doesn't want that amount. And it will cause you a lot of issues, mostly with the stomach, and you can't notice them as you go along. Um, so hopefully, um, hopefully there'll be some vegans out there who watch this. I mean, I don't know, it's probably predominantly going to be carnivore audience here, but I do hope that we can get over our division and sort of understand that there is a mid ground there to be had, as I mentioned earlier. And I think, like, it could take a long time, like you say, and we've just got to get out there and learn how to communicate with people. I suppose in this balanced way, and get people to take positive. And it would only ever come from themselves, I think. So if they do their own research in their own time, especially if they're coming from a vegan background, no one is ever going to be able to tell them to do this or that. It's got to be cultivated from within themselves. Um, and that's like I say, someone, my girlfriend at the time, was telling me about the carnival, but it was like, no, it's not going to happen. Like, it had to come from my own suffering, and therefore eventually I softened my position, and was enabled to sort of become. I don't sort of call myself carnivore. I think going forwards, I'm keto, like ketovore. And I always have this though as a tool, and that's the most empowering thing. Like, whenever I feel any sort of like issue, I know, right, it's back to strict carnivore. And then if it keeps coming back, I'll be more. It's like I'll be carnivore, and then I'll introduce avocados maybe, and some raspberries, some yogurt or whatever. But I'll never go back to full on carb mode. That's for sure.
It's just, yeah, there's just too many complications with the carbs. I mean, least of which, I mean, it's not good for the body, as you say, it's not good for the stomach. But you know, it's the fact that you just want to keep eating that's the real big issue there, right?
Yeah, and especially when you're dealing with the mental issues, you kind of use food as escapism. That's the one thing that you don't want to give up, because I mean, I frankly experienced so much boredom in my life. Like, I'm so bored that it's almost like I just, the only thing that I'm looking forward to at certain times is eating and cooking and all these things. Um, and so, like, that's it's such a huge part of our lives, is nourishment and finding almost excitement, and looking forward to it. But of course, that's come to the point where it's like we shouldn't be using it as entertainment. It shouldn't be like that. You should be satisfied socially outside of what you're eating. It's like it shouldn't be the primary thing that people are sort of like almost basing our lives around. And it's yeah, it's that sort of like addiction. That's what it is. Like, even when you experience the sensation of hunger, they don't realize, or we don't generally realize it, that that's not actually that's not real hunger. That's just your body reacting to the sugar roller coaster and saying, you haven't, what you've just eaten hasn't nourished me. Like, what's that? Why do you keep doing this? Like, what's all this sugar? And so, like, half an hour later, you're eating again. It's like, I mean, one of the slogans on the cereals here is that Shreddies keeps hunger locked up for lunch. So, well, it does the opposite of that. Like, you have a bowl of Shreddies, and literally, it's like 20 minutes later, it's like you haven't eaten anything. It's like, well, how on earth can they have the audacity to say that? But it's clearly not true. And like, you're sort of at work, sitting there at the desk, like, I'm starving. I'm actually hungry that I would have been if I hadn't had that. And so, like, you're sitting there waiting for lunch, and then you go out and eat all these carbs, and then you're at your desk just falling asleep. And then that was back in the day when I didn't have a problem sleeping at all. And, like, it gets to like 2 p.m. after lunch, and there'd be about half an hour window where I'd be lucky to not fall asleep, just sitting at my desk. And it's just a totally carb coma in myself. Um, and so, yeah, it's such a liberation see that it's just never should have been that way. Like my athletic performance could have been so much better if I'd just known this. Like, I mean, it's such a simple thing, but if I just, someone had just, or if society was just this way, just the recovery and like my football would have been so much better, my racket sports, and I would have just been so much healthier and never would have ran into these issues. But when you think that the cause is actually the cure, I mean, you're never going to get there. It's like you think eating the things that are causing the problems, like these some of these high FODMAP foods and all the sugar, and you think it's curing you, but it's doing the complete opposite. It's a totally backwards. Again, moderation being key. And so yeah, it's the dose that makes the poison. It's about sort of approaching it now with I think a balanced mindset to try and I don't like the term that plants are trying to kill you. That it sounds a bit naive to me, but I feel like absolutely they're defending themselves, and they'd rather not be consumed. Um, but it's some of that sort of alarmist stuff is can be useful, but it's also about, I think, understanding how we can create a sort of nuanced discussion. That it would be interesting actually to sort of bring some vegans in to um, some other vegans, like finding ways of getting that discussion going, because it's otherwise it can quite quickly become an echo chamber, right?
Yeah, I think it's good to be able to have discussions. It's just it can get dangerous when there's there you've got to have the discussions with the right people. And by the right people, I mean the people that are willing to accept that every discussion point you have, whether it's the side you agree with or not, has nuance.
Yeah,
Hmm.
that's where it's at.
And
Yeah,
because if like you mentioned the black and white thinking before, if you've got people in a discussion that can't look at the gray, it's just there's no discussion.
yeah, and it was I think it was like Einstein who said unthinking respect for authority is the greatest enemy of truth. And so like when people have been sold into a way of thinking by authority, like that's weighted sort of like 99% to one. Like if I go around saying something, like who am I? I'm nobody, like, but someone, and this is essentially what ties into the education system, is like they've been conditioned, not educated, but trained not to think, but what to think. And so they go through that system where they're rewarded based on their ability to remember and parrot things. And so they come out of that system and they just think this illness equals this medication, that illness equals that medication. And so all they know is, okay, you've got this, that equals that. And so they've lost touch with their kind of like more right brain faculties, like the imagination, intuition, like thinking in this way has led them into this sort of, or through this elementary system that sort of fractured their minds. And they are in their little field where that's kind of like that is so difficult for them to break free from it. And so they therefore go away as the authority though. It's like, well, why would I listen to you? You're not a doctor. You're not this. It's like, no, but I am a human being and I have experienced this and this helped me. But it doesn't mean anything. It's just as long as I've got, I need a lab coat or something. I might even buy one, just, buy a sort of like white,
Yeah.
be part of the medical priest class.
Yeah. Your opinion doesn't matter. You haven't got a stethoscope around your neck. It's
Yeah. It's and then of course the ego gets involved and people become ego identified with their worldview, and this happens everywhere. Like in science, in our general sort of paradigm, is like once you've written a book on something, you really don't want to undo that. Or if you've become successful in something and it turns out to be wrong, you will have a very hard time trying to accept that what you've done is wrong. Um, and I think that's like people are now worldwide faced with that issue where it's like, okay, have I been balanced? Have I approached this with an unbiased mind? Do I want this to be true? What if it isn't true? It's like the hallmark and the foundation of science is to permanently doubt your proposition, right? And people have forgotten that. They would rather basically just reaffirm and create confirmation bias so that they keep themselves in. It's almost like a survival mechanism. Like their social circles, everything, their whole life has been built around this falsehood, so it cannot be untrue. and I would rather die than see that be the case.
Yeah, yeah, and you do see that a lot. But yeah, I mean, you make a good point as well. Like the whole purpose of science is that it can be questioned. And
Yeah.
if you can't question it, then it's religion now, right? And then it's kind of it's just up to certain people to make up the rules, which kind of doesn't work with science.
Yeah, that is absolutely. Yeah, people have a hard time realizing that what they consider to be science, it's almost like the study has become gospel, right? So now you can easily lie with statistics, and because you can just say it's a statistic. He's like, oh, have you seen that study? You're basically about to lie, but if you preface it with saying, have you seen the study that does this? They now say, well, that's science. It's like, no, what's happened is you haven't researched any of that independently. You've had no critical thinking involved in that process. You simply just heard some authority say, studies show, studies prove, like these big sensationalist headlines. And now you don't realize that you're actually following a belief system. It's blind faith, but it's under the guise of science. It's under and that's how it's working today, I feel, in so many different ways, not just in nutrition and food. And people are living their lives in these sort of like echo chamber um, belief systems, thinking that they're following the opposite. Like most people, if you speak to say atheists and so on and so forth, they feel like they absolutely despise religion. But they don't realize how atheism can be a religion, is a religion, can be a belief system. Like it's something that has to be, like you say, balanced and brought out into conversation so people can realize these things, and approach things more scientifically, because science is kind of like a process, it's a method, it's the scientific method. It's not like this thing. It's almost like we've personified it, like science says this, science says that. It's like, okay, what is science?
Well, I think the events of 2020 exacerbated this problem as well.
Yeah, and like I mentioned, I won't say much on it because I don't want to get you censored. I had my channel deleted, and it's sort of shadow banned still. So it was a struggle for me, and it's a shame because I feel like I have a lot to say and I want to try and get it out there, but it's been very very difficult for me. And I'll probably just say like Dr. Stefan Lanka, Dr. Thomas Cowan, Dr. Andrew Kaufman as some names to throw out there for people who are curious about seeing things in a different way. Um, and yeah, there's so much to be said on that. Uh, but yeah, it's a difficult pill for people to swallow. It's been so well crafted. It's evil genius, and it just goes to speak what we were just saying about blind faith. It's um, it's an amazing, incredible thing to awaken from, like the Matrix. It's going to cause mayhem, I think, in society. Like as more and more people become aware and conscious of various things that are happening with these US elections coming up, and it's going to be an interesting ride. Um, but yeah, I think like if it starts with critical thinking and us sort of recultivating the inquisitive mind, like we can start to sort of like improve the world, the way that we're thinking, because that's really at the seat of everything. Is like how are we thinking, like what's the quality of our thoughts, like how are we able to control ourselves in discussion and debate. And yeah, I mean, I have high hopes for the future, but it's going to be a rocky road.
Yeah, I agree with those sentiments. Yeah. So Adam, how can people reach out to you? You mentioned you have a website? Do you have any other contacts?
Yeah, Adam at newearth.land if you want to email me. And if you do want to check out the website, newearth.land, please do so. Like I'm trying to get that moving along. And I feel like it could be a very empowering movement. You know, once we realize what's taking place and how we can empower ourselves. But I also have a YouTube channel, which is called New Earth. And that's essentially it. Those are my contact details. Yeah.
Awesome. So I'll link to those below. Adam, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your story. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, no worries at all. Thanks for having me.